welcome everybody. We're very pleased to have you here today as part of the second part of this webinar on integrating learning through nature journaling. My name is Hilary Inwood. I'm the lead of environmental and sustainability education at OISE at the University of Toronto. And I'd like to introduce you to my co-host, Pam Miller. Pam is the instructional teacher for the TDSB Eco Schools program. We're really happy to welcome so many of you into the room today. I know we've got teachers from across a variety of boards, mainly Toronto District School Board, but also from York Region, and we usually have some PL teachers in too, so happy to welcome you, as well as some OISE teacher candidates. And I want to give a special shout out to Adriana, who's with us today from Italy. So Adriana, we love having international viewers and participants, so thanks for joining us today. Feel free to send the link, folks, to your friends who live close or far. We're happy to share what we're doing, and especially today, as we're happy to share the work of amazing Eco Schools teachers as part of this webinar. I believe Jen Vetter is with us in the room today. She's part of the TDSB Eco Schools team, as well as Elise Kennedy, who hovers between both the OISE Environmental and Sustainability Ed team, as well as the TDSB's Eco Schools program. So I'm just sharing my screen with you now, just to show you a beautiful piece of nature journaling to start off with as we begin. We are hoping that you've had a chance to watch the first webinar, which would be fantastic if you did. If you didn't, I'm not too worried about it. It's archived and you can go back and see the first one. We did cover a lot of basics in that one. So in this particular webinar, we are going to give, after a brief land acknowledgement, we are going to give just a very quick overview of what happened in part one, but then we're going to hop right into talking with our teachers who have been trying out nature journaling with their children online. So always a bit of a trick to learn how to do these things online, but we're really looking forward to seeing what they've come up with. As usual, we'll start with a land acknowledgement. This is the amazing work of Jane Ash Poitras. It's called Buffalo Seed from 2004. It really kind of reminded me a little bit of a nature journal-like entry. It's got some pictures of flowers, of animal life. It certainly is a great introduction to Indigenous history too. Jane Ash Poitras is a Cree artist from out west. We acknowledge that we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. And we also would like to recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people on what was their land to begin with and is now known as Canada. So in our first webinar in this series, we did talk a little bit about the benefits of nature journaling and the notion of integration, taking it across the curriculum. It's a really great integrative type of approach that can take learning from a whole wide variety of subjects and bring it into your classroom. We talked about the 4 R's rather than the 3 R's of environment, of recycle, reduce, and reuse. We talked about the 4 R's of nature journaling, of reconnecting with nature, working to record it, using that as a jumping off point to research a little bit more about the natural world, and then also as a way to reflect on it. Now, we want to keep you in mind that, you know, we are part of nature. Humans are not separate from it, but turning our attention to other forms of life in the world of more than human beings is a great way to get people better attuned with what's going on in the world around them, and particularly in connection with the environment. Now, on that note, the bulk of today's seminar our webinar is going to be with TDSB teachers who have done some really great work in this area. They're going to share a little bit about what their instructional set looked like. They're going to talk a little bit about how that's worked with their children. So I'd like to introduce you, please, to Christine Lee. I'm very proud that Christine is a former grad from OISE's teacher education program from just a couple of years ago, and she's now working as a teacher at L&B PS. So with that, Christine, I've got your first slide up, and I'm gonna ask you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Hilary. So yeah, my name's Christine. I am a second-year teacher. I graduated very recently, so it's been really nice to get my foot in the door and start to teach children. So I am a PJ teacher. I've been teaching grade 3 French immersion at Allenby. So with moving on to distance learning, it's been quite a transition. I'm sure it is for everybody. So we've been giving them choice boards every week to choose from different activities to do so that they can kind of tell what they want us to do, and also give them the liberty to express their student voice while we know it's very hard to do so from home and from a computer. So after the first webinar, the first nature journaling webinar, I was familiar with nature journaling before this, and I'd done some in person in the school. So my students were already kind of familiar with the way that I like to bring them outside to do work, to observe the things around our neighborhood, around the school. So this was kind of not new to them, and they were excited to jump in to do that again. So the first thing that I tried out with them was a sound map. We had done that, something similar to that while we were at the school, but this time it was in their very own backyard. So I decided to do this over a 2-week period. So the first week I asked students to complete a sit spot, which is where they find a nice spot in their backyard or next to their window if they can't go outside. And they observe, they just sit and listen and look outside to see what they can see around their environment. So once they do that, I ask them to observe and report the sounds that they heard. And with these sounds, I asked them to create a specific symbol to represent the different sounds so that they could identify the sounds later on in a sound map. That was going to happen the week after I told them. So week 2, they revisited the same spot so that they could see if there were any differences with the sounds and with the environment. And then they were to draw a sound map, and then I will show you a few examples. So this is the samples from the first week. So these are just the noises that they heard or the different sounds. Some of them were not nature sounds. So that's actually very interesting as well to talk about what can we hear in the city versus maybe if we had teachers in rural areas, what would they be hearing and how would their sound maps look different? So I have 3 different samples here from students that wrote down what they heard and then a symbol that they thought represented that specific sound that they could incorporate into their sound maps. So they all took a different approach. Some of them drew bigger drawings and some of them had very simplistic. So number 3, you can see a very simplistic symbol for each thing that they saw, the birds, the rain, cars, of course. In the city, again, you hear a lot of different noises. But in the second week, they were asked to, Hilary, if you could move the slide to the second week, thank you. They were asked to actually make a sound map. So they put themselves in the middle of their sit spot, and then what could they hear? I asked them to think about or listen to hear where did they hear that sound? Was it in front of them, behind them, to their right or to their left? So that they could make a actual sound map that if somebody were to sit in their same spot, they could actually try to observe. Do I hear the same sounds in the same directions, or do they come from different places? So it was really interesting to see what they heard. They did have a lot of different approaches, but they all tried to put themselves in the middle and express what sounds they saw or they heard. They could see them, I guess, if they were animals, what was in their environment. So that was very interesting to see. The second thing that I tried was a soil observation. So, I mean, connecting with curriculum, the grade 3, one of the grade 3 science strands is soil and plants. So this was very fitting for them to explore what they could see in their neighborhood. So I asked students to observe a small patch of soil found in their backyard or in their neighborhood if they didn't have a backyard. For signs of spring. So what could they notice happening in the soil, and how could they tell that spring was here and things were happening? So I asked the students to record their observations with photos, drawings, and words, just to give them a variety of different things to communicate their learning. So these are some of the examples that I have from my students. So the first one, my student said that she saw tulips growing. So first they were buds, and then she could see that they started to open up. So that was very interesting. Some students took pictures as well of their garden, and the one just below the tulips, I found it very interesting that that student drew a perspective of under the soil. So that shows us learning of what happens underneath plants and what happens inside the soil that helps plants grow and helps things thrive. And then we have some garden planters as well that shows the different buds and the different plants that are emerging. So students were really noticing, going up close to see what was changing. I asked them to visit that patch of soil for more than one day, once a week for about 3 weeks, so that they could actually see change. so that they noticed, oh, things do actually change. And in one of the other webinars, we were talking about budding from trees and not noticing suddenly that the nature had sprung overnight. So actually looking at the bud every single day on your walk, or once every week would help as well, to just see what's changing and what's actually growing. The third and final, was to take a different perspective. So the other two were more hands-on, looking at nature, but this was taking a perspective using their French literacy skills to write a letter to a human from the perspective of an animal or a part of nature. So I said it could be the wind, it could be the water, a lake, anything that they wanted. So what would that animal want to ask or want to say to a human? So that got them to think about another being's perspective, whether a living being or a part of nature. So the things that I got back were very interesting, very fun. So I got a letter from a tree to the student, a letter from a flower, and my favorite one, just because it's so hilarious, the photo down there, is letter from pet rats. So she actually put her rats there after she wrote her letter, just to show that, yep, my rats are up to something. And they were asking, you know, questions from that perspective. And it's just nice to get the students to put themselves in another person's perspective, or another animal or being's perspective. So that was fun as well.
That makes perfect sense. I love that activity, Christine. That's very funny. And I think that having students think from that other alternate perspective is a really great way to get them to think that their needs are similar in some ways, but also very different. Certainly, we all need access to clean water and clean air to survive, and a secure food source, right? So thank you very much for sharing that with us today. I do want to point out too that if you haven't opened the chat room yet, Pam's already been popping up suggestions thank you, Pam, for other connections to the material that Christine was talking about. So at this point, I'd like to invite Elaine Hofer to join us. Elaine is from Withrow Public School. She's one of our grads from the Environmental Education Specialist course. We've been thrilled to have her involved in that over the years. And Elaine, we'd love to hear what you're working on with FDK, which is full day kindergarten, for those who might not know that term.
So thank you, Hilary. Actually, first I just need to clarify that I'm not teaching FDK this year. So this is a grade 1-2 class. Yes. And it was my, sorry, I'm on the wrong page. I'm trying to take notes and read notes at the same time. So my goals for this year with my grade 1-2s, with the distance learning, I really wanted them to get outside and do things that were offline. But I sort of had the sense from my kids that they really needed a wide range of things that they could do, because I wanted, I think some of them, I think a lot of them have backyards where we live, but I know that there are some who don't. And I just really wanted to respect that everybody has a different situation, and they're not all able to go and find a lovely sit spot out in a yard or wherever. So I felt that the easiest way for them to sort of connect with nature would be to start with a sit spot. And I kind of messed it up, because I realized after I did that the first thing I should have done was just sent them and just had them enjoy it. But the first thing I sent them out with was this little chart that they made up. But it seemed to work all right. So they were asked to just sit for as long as they could and record what they could see and what they could hear and what they wondered. I tried to choose a format that would be easy for them to replicate without a printer as well. And I actually did my own sit spot from inside my dining room looking out the window, because I always try to figure out, you know, which kid is going to have the most trouble doing this in the way I envision, and then I try to do it from their perspective. Yeah, and I think that they enjoyed it. I mean, I had a few kids participate, but I've also had a lot of challenges in terms of getting people to, or getting the kids just kind of on board with the online learning. There's an awful lot of sort of popping in and popping out. And so I don't have the same consistency as I might have, I think, in the classroom. So we did the sit spots, and then the second time I sent them out to do the sit spots, I didn't get any uploads into their portfolios. So I don't know if they did it a second time or not. I do have a lot of parents who've told me that they're doing the work with the kids, but they just can't manage to get it uploaded onto the computer. And so I can only hope that I planted a seed. And then they did, some of them share pictures of where their sit spots were, which were lovely. Yeah, so I think that worked out well. And then Hilary, if you can go to the next slide. So then I was trying to give them different options about ways to observe nature. And so the one chart was the sit spot chart that I did initially. And then there was this nature watch diary from the last workshop, the last webinar. And I like that this one was more focused for them, and sort of, I like the way it on the left has the season, the date, the time, you know, the weather, little things like that, because I wanted them to eventually move into tracking the weather a bit. And then I really like about this one that on the right side, it has the trees, the plants, the birds, just because I think when you're in grade 1 and 2, you don't really know where to start always. And so I think this was a really great starting point, and you could see some of them drew pictures. And one of the girls told me that she wrote that she saw a stick bug from her window. I was like, wow, you must have a really amazing window or amazing eyes. And again, I didn't get any second pages from this, but I had wanted to, I use this to sort of to lead into participating in the Bird Blitz that birdscanada.org does. And so we sort of use this as a springboard to go into looking at birds. And then I didn't collect the data because it's in a different, it sort of looks different, the data from the birds, so I didn't share it, but they did go and look and try to find birds, and that was pretty cool. So a couple of them went for walks, and some of them looked out their windows, because I've also been feeling a bit uncertain about encouraging the kids to go outside. I mean, I think it's maybe okay now, but I know a few weeks ago, it seemed like we all just need to stay home. And I didn't want to put anyone in a position where they felt like they had to do something that they weren't comfortable with. There was a participant in the last workshop who talked a lot about how her kids were not allowed to go outside at all. And so that really resonated with me. But I'm hoping this week to do, like the coming week, to do a little more nature journaling, and we're going to start looking at bugs and maybe build a bug hotel. Yeah, so it's been a lot of fun. I don't know, how much progress we've made, but I think the kids who are doing it are enjoying it, and I'm really happy to have had this opportunity. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Elaine. We really like hearing about the trials and tribulations of doing this work online. It's not easy to do when you don't know about all of the individual circumstances of your students, and we really appreciate your sensitivity to that, which is great. Our third teacher today, I'm just going to pop up their slides, is Catherine Bryce. And Catherine's also one of our grads, not quite as recent as Christine, but still moderately recently from OISE. And Catherine, really thrilled you were very actively involved in our environmental and sustainability ed initiative when you were on campus. And I'm so thrilled now that you're out as a practicing TDSB Eco Schools teacher. So we're really looking forward to hearing about your work today. I should point out that Catherine's at Fairbanks School.
So hello, everybody. My name is Catherine Bryce. I teach grade 7-8 at Fairbank Public School in Toronto. So I learned about nature journaling at the first webinar. My students had been doing a daily journal, but I thought, okay, this is a way to switch it up a little bit for the month of May. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted students to get out of the nature journal activity, I was thinking about it as a way to support their mental health. It's a way that they could be away from the screen for a bit if that worked for them, and as well to foster like a sense of place and connection to where they were at the time. And so as I organized my assignments, I wanted to make sure it was open-ended and flexible so students could do it inside or outside. I made templates in my Google slide I shared, but they could also do it by hand. Like Elaine had talked about, trying to take into different considerations into account to see how best we can support, but again, still learning along the way. I also wanted to make sure it was something that they could do independently. So even though they are in grades 7 and 8, I wanted to make sure it was something to be very clear, very straightforward, that they could complete themselves. So here is what I did for the week 1 at the beginning of May. So I had them find a sit spot and do 2 observations. So you can see at the top there's a student describing their sit spot in great detail, and then below is a student's first observation. In my observation, I just had them, since it was the beginning, you know, take notes in point form, but then I found that they were very simple in terms of like squirrel, tree. So my feedback for that first week was, okay, let's put in a little bit more detail. What are you seeing? Can you be more specific? What's happening? What's going on? So then for week 2, I just had them do some more observations, but I gave them some prompts, again, just taken from the first Nature Journal webinar. There's a student who did the perspective of their dog, and then I had them come up with some questions. So by this point, they had done 5 or 6 observations, and so from there, I wanted them to think, okay, what are they curious about? What do they want to learn more about? So they just had to develop 5 questions for the end of week 2. And then week 3, which was last week, they were doing some of their research. So I gave them some research links with information related to City of Toronto. I'm not sure how many use them because they were a little bit dense, but it was there. It was there for them if they were curious. And then I made a template for them to answer one of their questions, and then a template for them to choose an animal they've observed and a plant they've observed and learn some more about it. So here you can see an example of a student researching the vision spectrum of a dog compared to a human. And then lastly, this week is the reflection week. And so with the Nature Journal and thinking about big ideas and learning, I wanted them to draw on the big ideas talked about in the first Nature Journal webinar, but I also didn't want to be too open-ended and say, you know, create something around the theme of sustainability. I felt like that would be a little too loose. So in my prompts, I tried to embed the big ideas within the prompts that I was asking them to complete. And so then on the final slide, here's a piece of work that a student did, her reflection on the changes to spring on the next slide. Yeah, so there it is. So that was her final reflection, some of the signs of spring and growth and change that she had noticed. And so similar to what Elaine was talking about, not all students completed their work, but those that did really enjoyed it, and they found it was nice to look outside. One student really enjoyed watching squirrels and the things that they did. This student had talked about really enjoying watching the sunset every night and those beautiful colors. And so I think it was beneficial and meaningful for those that did do it. At my school as well, the English as a second language teacher has been doing it with her students, but she's also used some picture prompts as well to build that vocabulary and be a bit more direct in the learning to help support them that way. And then I have another colleague who's going to connect the Nature Journal to the ETFO document Beyond Land Acknowledgement, which has lots of great activities that connect to place and belonging, the land, but also the history of the land and the ongoing considerations around that. So I would definitely go for it and see how it goes. I know myself, I've really enjoyed observing nature myself. I find it so calming and relaxing, especially these days. So I would just go for it. Thank you very much.
Great suggestions. I'm actually just tapping a little message saying what a beautiful artwork that is.
Yes, this student is very talented. She's one of our Eco Club members as well, very artistic. So I was happy she had time to finish her reflection quick enough for me to share it today.
Yeah. But I really want to point out though, and one of the reasons we've been really purposeful to show a whole wide range of work is that some students will go to town like this one has in terms of doing a really finished work of art. Others won't, and I think it's perfectly fine. They can reflect their learning in whatever way works best for them, and we're going to find that that's certainly in a time when they have a little more choice in this, a little more latitude, that they're going to take advantage of the ones that interest them the most, and I think that's perfectly fine. Thank you so much for sharing those today. Those are just lovely. Okay, so Amanda Brown. Amanda is an elementary teacher from Sir Adam Beck, PS, and we're really interested in hearing, Amanda, what you've been doing with your classes as well.
Hi, everyone. Just to start, I wanted to give you some background information on how I used nature journaling with my class. And I have a French immersion grade 3 class. When I attended the first part of the nature journaling webinar, it was a new concept to me. It was something that I had not yet tried myself or with my students. So shortly after the webinar, I decided to implement the idea with them. If you could go to the next slide, that would be great.
Go to the next slide. Yep.
Yes, please. Thank you. So to introduce the assignment to my students, I set the expectations for them that they choose a spot in nature that they can see at least once a week. And they were to observe how this spot changes over time. And so that students stay safe, given this current situation, they could also choose a spot visible from a window in their house, such as a tree or a garden. And students were then provided a list of ideas of what a nature journal can look like. They were also given a few sentence starters and a list of ideas that they should always include, such as the date, the temperature, also things like the weather, the use of numbers, the use of measuring tools, and of course the description of what they see. Students were then provided with several different templates that they could choose to use for their entries. So these are just a few examples of the student work and the templates that were provided. As you can see, I included the date, the temperature, a spot for them to record their observations. Some of the slides had a spot to include the weather. And this was just to encourage that they did do those parts of the journal. This student chose a tree in her backyard. And when she started, the end of April, she observed that the tree still had the old leaves from last year, and measured them, and they were about 3 centimeters. And then following that, about a month later, she said finally the leaves had fallen off and the new leaves were starting to grow. And yes, so the next student, he chose, there's a ravine nearby in the neighborhood, so he chose the waterfall in the ravine. And he recorded the first time that there was not a lot of greenery, there was not a lot of water flowing. And then again, about a month later, he noticed there was a lot of sun, the sky was blue, there's a lot more greenery, and he really liked being in that area, playing near the waterfalls. Okay, and then this final example of what a student did, she chose a tree in front of her house. And in her nature journal, she started off by recording the tree, the measurement of the leaves again. She measured them at 3 centimeters and said they had grown a bit from the first observation. And then on the next slide, she has a few more entries that she did. And the tree, the leaves on the tree grew a bit. In her third entry, they were about 4 centimeters. And in the last, in her last observation that she's done so far, she measured them again and they were 9 centimeters and said there were a lot more trees and the trees were a lot more green. And so what I really like about using the nature journal over a period of time is that you really can see the changes in nature. And I think moving forward, it would be really interesting to do throughout an entire year so that they can see the changes in every season and really see how their spot changes and how nature grows.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I completely agree with you. It would be wonderful to use that same technique over time. And I love that you've used photography, that you've asked the kids to use photography a lot, because that takes off some of the stress for some of them, especially as they get a little older, where they say, I can't draw, which we know isn't true, but without that direct instruction from teachers, sometimes they might not have that same level of comfort. So I love that you've had them using photography. Pam pointed out in the chat room, this is a great way to get measurement going and a sense of scale. So you can see the natural integration you can start to flow into with mathematics, which is great.
And Hilary, I'm going to interrupt. A couple of folks, I know when we met, Amanda, you were showing us how to make these templates. Is that included in the next slide? Perfect.
Yes,
so
there it is.
When you download this webinar after it's been archived, make sure you stop on this page and you can learn how to make templates. And then someone was also asking, and I think for all of you that are presenting, are you okay if they share some of your samples with the students in their eco team or their classroom? If you're not, just put that in the chat and then Elise will make sure it's recorded, so which ones you can share and not share.
Jen Barron points out in the chat room that she said, I did this type of measurement for my kids in my own flower garden, but now I wish I'd seen these ideas a month ago, so she could have taken it on the next step further. So I think you're getting the wheels turning in everybody's brains this afternoon, which is wonderful. Our last presenter for today is Hongliang Hu. Hongliang is an early childhood educator at Eglinton Public School and is also a member of our action research team. We run an action research team focused on environmental learning. It's a nice part of our collaboration between OISE and the TDSB, and we're really happy, Hongliang, to have you here today to talk about what you're doing with the kindies, with kindergarten students.
Thank you, Hilary. I would like to introduce the weekly nature-based learning in my Google Classroom. I take charge of nature and environmental learning in my Google Classroom. So first one is nature scavenger hunt. So students need to find out things on a nature walk. This learning activity is integrated with literacy and numeracy. I can tell some students made a list of things placed with natural stuff and counted how many they found. Some students use a picture to illustrate what they are supposed to find or put the check mark in the right direction. Some students made the photo journal. You can tell from the students' work, or the photo journal with the writing. So students really love exploring nature and had fun with family. Next slide, please. The next one is sunset building in nature. So this learning activity is observing sunset from a desirable place and using inquiry question to engage their learning, such as, what do you observe while watching sunset? How does watch a sunset make you feel? And why does the sun set and rise? So as the students were observing how the sky changed the colors, the students made a sunset art paintings, some made a drawing, some made the paper art craft, and some did a creative writing and drawing of a sunset city. Students and family really enjoyed this one and felt it supporting self-recognition and well-being at remote learning at home. So next slide, please. Designing trees with food. This was during week 3 of the remote learning. Most of students were not able to go outside. This is project tree learning I did in my Google Classroom. It is integrated with tree literacy and mathematics, such as how many pieces of food used, sorting foods into groups, and what patterns designed. Through this hands-on learning opportunity, students learned the parts of the trees and the needs of the trees. Then they talk about importance of trees in the ecosystem and why we need to planting more trees instead of cutting off trees. They also learn about eating healthy food and develop literacy and mathematics skills with the food. They learned that plants and animals provide a habitat for plants and animals. Also discovered how plants and animals depend on trees in many ways. You can tell from the students' work that put birds there, They know birds depend on the tree and the trees as a habitat for them. Next slide, please.
Hongliang, just before you move on, I have to tell you, I have a sneaky suspicion. These are wonderful. I have a sneaky suspicion that maybe some of the parents and other family members got involved in this one. So, I mean, which I think is actually a wonderful aspect of this particular activity. So
yeah, this is learning happening in the kitchen. Families, parents all get involved during mealtime and snack time. They talk about design the tree. They talk about eat healthy food. So virtual field trip is the butterfly word. Normally we had the butterfly in the classroom and released them outside, but this year I provided a virtual field trip to Butterfly World in Florida. So some students won't miss any opportunity of learning about butterfly. They post their butterfly work from different modes of expression. Like they made the butterfly cycle, they made the butterfly art craft, they designed butterfly with the loose parts. They also made a symmetry of butterfly, especially when they drew butterfly flying around of the flowers because they learned the role of the butterfly in the ecosystem, especially butterflies as pollinators visiting a variety of flowers and plants from this virtual field trip. So next slide is ReGrow in water. This is about water education I integrated in my Google Classroom. Water is life, water supports life. In water, what kinds of vegetables, fruits, and herbs will regrow using just a small scrap of original food? Students regrow different vegetables in water, and then they kept a nature growing journal starting from day one to document what they are observed and how vegetables regrow. Some did a mini window vegetable garden, just like the students' work, you can tell. And some choose a few vegetables to regrow in water. Some only choose one, like they choose one carrot, and then they made a detailed nature growing journal with pictures and with questions and with writings. So in a few weeks, I can summarize the formatting of nature journaling from my students' work. They used like painting and drawing, art craft, and creative writing, notepads, design, photo journal with writing, pictorial checklist, and observation and inquiry. But here I really appreciate the parents' support because those kids are really young, 4 and 5 years old. They work together at home. Thank you, everybody. That's what I would like to share today.
Bravo. Yeah, lots of people are applauding you right now, Hongliang. you and the teacher that you work with have done some amazing work. I have to tell you that Hongliang is doing some research into nature-based loose parts play. That's really interesting. She's put her first article in for publication. So we're really excited to see your research play out, not just in academic settings, but also in very practical ways, Hongliang, in your classroom. So good for you. Really wonderful work. The ReGrow in nature, I'm going to show you my own response to that one because I'm sort of kindergarten level student. So I'm going to show you my own response to that in just a minute. Just as a follow-up, first of all, thank you to all of the teachers who have showed what they're working on in their classrooms. Given that you've had no special training in these areas, given that you've had to really think on your feet all last minute during this pandemic, we're so impressed with what you've all been able to accomplish. So congratulations, really neat work. And I can only imagine what you could do if you had learners in person. I would be, I'm sure, even more so. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up webinar in another year's time to see what people have been able to do over the long time. I do want to point out that, using artist examples to inspire either young learners or older learners in this work is really important. We talked a little bit about the work of Claire Walker-Leslie, whose work we're looking at here on the left. This is Lisa Cheney's on the right. Again, sort of bringing writing and image making together, text and image together as a form of integrated learning. Can definitely recommend that. I did want to share, Pam and I take our work very seriously here. And Pam did her own homework for this one, this workshop as well, this webinar as well. Pam, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your experience with nature journaling that you took on recently?
Sure. So in the bottom corner, you see it says California Native Plant Society, and this is a wonderful journal or wonderful resource that we've already included in the last webinar, but I thought I'd bring your attention to it. And it gives you an introduction, really the skills that the kids will be learning, but it also gives you some structured activities. And this particular prompt, I'll zoom in, zoom out, asks students or participants to look at something from 3 scales. Now I've only done 2, but my images, when I crop them, they really show 3, like coming into the forest and seeing the carpet of trout lilies, getting a little bit closer, seeing the actual plant with the flowers, and then getting really close. In the prompt, it said, you could take art or any of these journals and ask 3 questions. You'll notice, I wonder, and what it reminds me of. And I think of those visible learning protocols that were already mentioned. But I started, when I was doing the flower, I was using watercolor pencils, and I was really struggling trying to get the color right. And so it really made me ask some questions about the modeling on the leaf. Does that mean there's no chlorophyll in the leaf? The different colors on the trout lily itself, was that to attract bees? Why was the trout lily upside down? You notice that the stamens are down. You know, what is that, a bumblebee coming? Obviously not a hummingbird, or was it? So I think when we do nature journaling, it's important to recognize that this could be not only learning itself, but it should launch learning forward, as it did for me. Thanks, Hilary.
Well, and you know, I was telling Pam the other day that I'm also a dedicated learner, and Pam gave me a homework assignment in the last webinar, which was to take my own inspiration. I started in the last nature journaling webinar saying that we could do this inside with our students. It doesn't have to be outside. So I showed the image on the left of 2 weeks growth from a carrot top that I had saved, and I was shocked about how quickly it went. So I have to tell you that 6 weeks growth on the right-hand side, and it's actually started to flower, which is amazing. But I use that also as a jumping off point. So I like to practice what I preach, and I designed my own little nature journal, but in creative form, all about this carrot. So this is an accordion fold journal. I want to give you a couple of ideas of how you can get children to pull these together into different forms. It's an accordion fold journal, so I took a large sheet of paper that I happen to have and just accordion folded it up one way and then the other into equally sized sections, and then I just started to cut. I cut it into almost like a ladder shape. So what you're looking at is both sides of the journal. It actually unfolds like an accordion, and I've been able to capture everything from the different stages of growth. It got me to look into a little bit of the history of the carrot. I didn't know it went back so far. I looked at the taxonomy of it. I even started cooking with carrots a lot more during the period I was doing this. So it's amazing how you can get into some intensive learning when you find something that kind of intrigues you. And for me, the hook was that carrots starting to root just in water on the windowsill of my office. So really sort of a fun thing to do. I do want to point out, though, you can also talk to your students about doing a collage to bring their learning together from different areas. The one on the left, I worked with the grade 5 and 6 class. Now, some of this, of course, you have to do in person, but they can start to bring natural items that they found as part of their nature journaling and simply glue them in. With this particular grade 6 class, we actually, the white piece of paper that you can see is sort of part of the background. The students handmade that paper, which was a whole lot of fun. We put leaves and seeds that we'd found in this park near the school. As part of this, they did poetry, and they even did a bit of hand sewing with some illustrations of what they'd seen in the park. So collaging is an easy way to pull all this together. And the other one is just taking an accordion fold and then tipping up one edge of the piece of paper. And this results in giving you a little pocket at the bottom. So what you're looking at on the right is actually 2 sides of the same accordion fold nature journal. But I'm just going to show it to you here too. I don't know if you can see this or not. But on the bottom, it's actually got little pockets. So I'm just holding it up in front. And in the pockets, you can slip, whether you want to slip drawings or, again, things they found in sight. So very simple types of formats that students can work on with their families to pull things together if they so choose. Okay, so we have got lots of resources as part of this webinar to share with you. These were the same ones that were up in the first webinar, but in case you missed them the first time, because this particular one of the How to Teach Nature Journaling, we'll send out the links again as a follow-up to this webinar. But this is such a fantastic book, and it is available free. So well worth taking a look at. It's got such amazing ideas for integrated learning through nature journaling. Got a couple of other ideas. I know that Susan Elliott's with us, who's the author of Connecting the Dots, which is an amazing publication in its own right. She got the Claire Walker Leslie book, The Curious Nature Guide, and said that it's well worth every penny she spent on it because it was just a fantastic and a beautifully designed piece too. And the Pam, you made mention of the one on the left, Opening the World Through Nature Journaling, which is the California Native Plant Society. Again, free download. So lots of great resources to support. We'll send these out to you after the end. Pam has very kindly pulled together a resource folder on this. Again, we'll send you the link to that so you can directly access all the materials she's put in there to support. There's lots of apps out there to support it too, folks. So whether you want to do trees and plants through LeafSnap, or actually I forgot to add Seek. Seek is the child-friendly version of iNaturalist that you can use, spelled S-E-E-K. I'll add that up to the list. Whether you want to do animals or insects through the Audubon series, there's some really great apps you can use with your students to do nature journaling as well. We are at our, we try to keep these to about 45 minutes in this case. Thank you to our wonderful presenters today. If you can join me in a jazz hands applause, round of applause for all of them. Thank you so much for attending today. Do know that we have a whole new series of June webinars that are coming up. They're on the TDSB's EcoSchools website. They're also on the OISE ESE website.
Linda's on the call as well. Part of the June webinars will be including her work around outdoor play and learning and how to incorporate loose parts and play and really adding that kind of element or background information to your toolkit. So definitely check those out. So thanks, Linda. Again, big thanks to the teachers. How will we share information was asked. So we're going to go to the TDSB EcoSchools website. And on the webinar side, or on the left side, you'll see a little link to the webinars. And on the webinars, Elise Kennedy is so kind. She downloads them, puts together all the resources, and we put a folder there so you can access them at that time. Yeah, there she is. She's putting the link because she's so good at it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody, today. Thank you again to our presenters. Fantastic work, and we're so pleased. Thank you for all of the work that you've done.
Great. Thanks, everyone.